So a brief anecdote to get us started. When I was in fourth grade, probably the most I've ever loved a teacher, although it's a tough call because I have been blessed to have had many wonderful teachers. But my fourth grade teacher, Mrs. Eddy, when she read a book that hit her emotionally, she would cry through it. And the hardest we ever heard her cry was when she read us Bridge to Terabithia. We came back from lunch and we're in the last few chapters, and it took us the rest of the day to get through them. She had to stop and repeat things. She was crying so hard. And then afterward, when she finally had finished the story, she had to leave the class, and an assistant came in to stay with us to the end of the day so she could go and collect herself. And I thought, wow, what a striking image of the power of a book, because I spent my teen years trying, sometimes rottenly, to make teachers cry, and never as effective as your book. Fortunately, my mother had already read it to me, and I'd already enjoyed the story. So I wasn't worried about missing the ending, but I thought, my gosh, the power that a writer had held over my fourth grade teacher, and that was a memory that has stuck with me. And I thought, well, what else could a book do? So my guest tonight needs no introduction. Katherine Paterson, two-time Newbery Award winner of the Hans Christian Andersen Award. You were named in 2000 to be a living legend by the Library of Congress. I think you were one of, 80 living legends at this point?
Oh, yeah, something like that. I'm not alone in that category.
No, it's very impressive. You're with Toni Morrison, Steven Spielberg, Martin Scorsese, all kinds of
Judy Blume, Maurice Sendak, Beverly Cleary. We were the children and young adult writers among the 70, 80.
And two of them are mentioned in your newest book, Birdie's Bargain.
Yeah.
It's available if you're listening to us as this comes out, esteemed audience. You could be pre-ordering your copy of Birdie's Bargain, which will be available Tuesday, October 5th, 2021. If you're listening to us after that date, good news, you can go get it right now. So probably the best place to start is, what is your first memory of wanting to be an author?
Oh my. I didn't want to be an author as a child. And I say that with a little embarrassment because I have a lot of friends who are writers, and all the really good writers I know knew by the time they were 8, that they were going to be writers, and they were already writing great things. I was writing terrible things, and not very much. Shall I recite my first published work?
Oh, absolutely.
I recite this a lot. Pat, pat, pat. There is the rat. Where is the cat? Pat, pat, pat. Obviously, I was not taught to read at school, but at school we were reading Dick and Jane, and I think Pat, pat, pat owes a lot of credit to, a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? Anyhow, it sounds like Dick and Jane to me. But I also have a letter that I wrote at the same time to my father, who was up in the hinterlands of China. And I'm not ashamed of that. He made me very happy because he kept that letter that I had written him when I was 7 years old. And I could write pretty well when I was 7. But at school, I thought I was supposed to sound like school. At home, I was reading wonderful books. I cannot remember when I learned how to read. It was as natural as speaking to me, and I started that pretty early. And I always knew I was a reader, but I didn't imagine I'd be a writer. And indeed, when that Pat, Pat, Pat was published in the Shanghai American School newspaper, right beside it was a letter from Miss S.S. Shields, the second grade teacher, that said, the second graders' work is not up to our usual standards this week. So my first published work was published alongside my first review, which, as you can see, was not a very positive review. So nobody thought I would be a writer when I was a child. I didn't think I'd be a writer when I was a child. I had a teacher, a professor in graduate school, who stopped me in the hall one day and said, "Have you ever thought of being a writer?" And she was saying this on the basis of an essay question I'd written on an exam. And I said, "No. I wouldn't want to add another mediocre writer to the world." I mean, I majored in English literature in college. I know what great writing is. And she said, well, she was my theology professor. She said, maybe that is what God is calling you to be. Well, I didn't think God needed a lot more mediocre writers. I thought God had plenty of mediocre writers. But so I didn't start writing. But after I came back from Japan, she got me a job writing. So that's when I started being a writer, was writing curriculum for Presbyterian Church. And then I thought, I don't really like writing curriculum. I'm going to write fiction. That's what I love. And of course, nobody wanted to publish anything I wrote for many years. So I was sending things around for 7 years that nobody wanted to publish, except I sold 2 things in that 7-year period. I sold 1 short story, and the little magazine that published it died the following month. And I sold 1 poem, and the little magazine that bought it died before it published it. That was my writing career for 7 years. And I was writing quite regularly at that time, although I have to say I had 4 tiny children. And so I was writing in the cracks of my life. And a lot of stuff I've written that dates back to those days should never be published. And I hope nobody will ever find it and publish it, because I was learning how to write. You know, you have to learn how to do it. And I learned, I didn't go to school for it. I learned because I read books. And I learned how to put a sentence together. I learned how to put a paragraph together. I learned how to put a story together just because I read so much. And I didn't necessarily read wonderful things, but I read enough to know the difference between good writing and poor writing. So it was reading that turned me into a writer, and also Dr. Little, who kept pushing me until I started writing. She's of course died now, but she was very proud of the fact that she was the one who got me into writing.
So I assume she was around to see you go on to win all of the award, or at least some of the awards that you won.
Yes. And she particularly loved Great Gilly Hopkins, because she had said that she couldn't find any books with truly good characters in them. And she wanted me to write a book that had a truly good character. And so I put Mamie Trotter into Gilly Hopkins. And because I think Mamie is a truly good person. And I was at a conference, it was in Mississippi, I think, and everything was running a little late. And the woman who was going to introduce me was kind of taking me down the aisle towards the stage. And this young woman grabbed me by the other arm and she said, wait, I have to ask you, I'm doing a doctoral on Southern settings in children's literature. And I have to know who is Mamie Trotter. And I was being dragged by the other arm. And I said, God, as I went. And I've often said I didn't know from the expression on her face if they believed in God at the University of Chicago, but I was sure they didn't think she spoke with a Southern accent. But yeah, that's my true character, the person that loves unconditionally and doesn't give up on you.
Of course, I've just re-enjoyed or reread The Great Gilly Hopkins, and of course, she immediately commands sympathy from the reader, and even a little bit of admiration for how committed she is to being rotten, which fair enough. But when she was mean to Mimi, I was like, whoa, let's let's have some reason.
Yeah. It's Gilly. Of course, I got, as you probably know, get a lot of unhappy people, mostly unhappy adults from the books I've written. And the one woman who knew my father stopped me, and because she was so upset about Gilly's bad language. And she said, what does your father think of this book? Now, my father was a conservative Presbyterian minister who'd been a missionary in China. And I said, well, and it was absolutely true. I said, of all the books I've written, Gilly Hopkins is his favorite. But of course, I said, he had read the parable of the prodigal son. Wasn't that mean of me? But it's true, because I think, Gilly is the prodigal who's loved by the father and welcomed home. Although Gilly couldn't stay with, that's what makes my young readers unhappy, is because Gilly couldn't stay with Mamie after she'd found that kind of love. But I'm very interested. One day I was talking to an after-school group of kids, and several kids in the group were foster kids or had been foster kids. And the children who hadn't had that experience were just really berating me for not letting Gilly stay with Mamie Trotter, and the other kids were shaking their heads, said, don't work that way.
Your endings from based on the most recent books that I've read, without spoiling anything, they don't end necessarily all sad all the time, but they don't end overly happy either. They seem to aim for sort of an honest medium. Is that a fair assessment, somewhere between happy and sad?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think, and that's why I worry a little bit when children read my books when they're too young. I mean, being able to read well isn't the same thing as having an emotional maturity to read that particular book. And I would never stop a child from reading a book, because I think there's a lot of interior filter that helps you in those situations. My conservative parents never stopped me from reading anything. And I read all kinds of stuff because I read very early and I read very broadly. But I worry when children read books like mine too young, because there's a stage in your life when you need happily ever after. And I want children to be able to have happily ever after when that's what they really need. And then they get a little older and they see what the world is like, and then They're ready to read books that don't give them that straight happily ever after. Does that make sense to you, Rob?
It does. I know that one of Birdie's big concerns is adults lying to her all of the time. And I think that if Birdie came to one of your books, she wouldn't feel that way about you.
I hope not.